So we need to get our own house in order before we point the finger at other nations. And I'm pleased to say that along much of its migratory route, the osprey is respected, it's welcomed.
Hello, my name is Sacha Dench, but I'm better known as the human swan. I'm also the UN's ambassador for the Convention on Migratory Species. This year, the charity I founded, Conservation Without Borders, is launching a new expedition to follow the flight of the osprey, an epic migration of 10,000 kilometres through 14 countries from Europe to West Africa. As a part of this, we're doing a series of podcasts to highlight the global stories and connections this bird makes, to help us see our complex and challenged world through the eyes of this incredible animal. In this episode, I talked to broadcaster and naturalist Iolo Williams about his decades watching the Ospreys return to Wales, about the disaster on the Llyn Brenig nest, and he delivers an important message to our colleagues in conservation right along the Flyway. So thanks very much for agreeing to chat to us. You are obviously Welsh. You've been a naturalist since you were small, I am assuming. Have you been around since before the Ospreys were even back in breeding in Wales?
I've been around. I've been around since the Ospreys nested in Wales 400 years ago. It feels that way sometimes. Yeah, I've been watching wildlife since I was about as far back as I can remember. Really, so probably 3 or 4 years old, and that's 57 years ago now. And yeah, I remember when the first Ospreys nested here. I actually worked for the RSPB between 1984 and 1998. And occasionally we'd have a young pair of ospreys look as if they were about to settle down in suitable places, but unfortunately they never did. And it's only really after the reintroduction to Rutland Water that they recolonized Wales. It was as if these reintroduced, relocated birds were more willing to wander widely afield. And 2004 was the year that Ospreys first bred in Wales. 2 pairs actually, one literally 4 miles down the road from where I live here in mid Wales, and the other one, the well-known pair now up at Llyn near Porthmadog. The Llyn pair failed, but the one down the road here had reared 1 young, and since then they've increased slowly. Every year for the past 3 or 4 years now, 4 or 5 years now, we've had 5 pairs. But the excellent news, Sacha, is that this year looks like we've got 7, possibly even 8 pairs. So things are looking really good this year.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And then obviously part of the project is trying to look at threats to ospreys all along the Flyway. There should be a lot more ospreys in the UK. Do you know much about the background, or particularly in Wales or across the UK, of why there were so few, why they were extinct?
Yeah, it's the same story for most of our birds of prey. If you look back through our history, particularly from the end of medieval times onwards, it's a history of persecution. We lost white-tailed eagles from the UK. We lost ospreys from the UK. Ospreys recolonized Scotland, Speyside, naturally in the 1950s. Protection was given to the nest at Lochgarten, and they increased slowly, really, really slowly. The reason they were persecuted is because the big estates would persecute anything that competed with them, for whether it was for fish, as in the case of the ospreys, whether it was for ducks or partridge or pheasant or grouse. So if you were a hen harrier, a golden eagle, a white-tailed eagle, a buzzard, an osprey, then you were considered to be vermin, and you were shot, you were trapped, you were poisoned endlessly. And as I say, we lost quite a few species. Thankfully, all of those have now either recolonized naturally or they've been reintroduced. And in the case of the ospreys, they came back in the 1950s. They spread slowly. And then around 20 years ago, they decided to reintroduce ospreys to Rutland Water in central England. And that really was a kick forward for ospreys. It's from that point onwards that they began to recolonize parts of Wales, northern England, areas like Kielder, the Lake District, have got good populations now. And of course, there's been a recent reintroduction to Poole Harbour down in the south as well, not far from Southampton there. And this year they bred there for the first time. So far, over the last few decades, nearly all the news for ospreys in the UK has been good news.
Do you remember ever seeing ospreys flying overhead before they were breeding in Wales, flying overhead?
I do, yes. I remember working for the RSPB in 1988. I don't remember seeing them as a young lad. I used to go up on the moors to see hen harrier and merlin. I remember seeing the first honey buzzards breeding in Wales, finding the nest in 1991. But the first ospreys I remember seeing was going up to Scotland as a kid in 1974 to Loch Garten to see the pair there. But in Wales, it was in the late 1980s. I think it would have been 1989 when we had a pair, turned out to be a fairly young pair, looking as if they were going to breed in the Llyn Valley in mid-Wales. There's a series of reservoirs there, and one of them's got this wonderful island in the middle of it, and the birds were hanging around there. They were fishing on the local reservoirs. We got all excited. We thought, oh dear me, this pair's going to nest here. Here we go. And then we put up a platform in the winter for them. Unfortunately, they didn't come back. You know, they do what most young birds of prey do. They wander widely for the first few years until they're sexually mature, and then they return to the area where they themselves were born to nest. So those birds probably went back up to Scotland eventually. And as I said, it wasn't until after the Rutland reintroduction that we really began to see ospreys take off here. We saw quite a few birds over summering on some of the estuaries, especially northwest Wales, and then in 2004 they finally bred.
And what happened last year at Llyn Brenig?
Yes, virtually every year since ospreys recolonized, we've had good news. Most of the pairs have reared either 2 or 3 young. We've had some very good years, and last year was a disaster on several levels, really. Several pairs failed. The ones that did rear young just reared 1 young, which is unusual for our ospreys. And of course, to cap it all off, we had an absolute disaster at Llyn Brenig. Llyn Brenig's in northeast Wales. It's a reservoir up on the hills there, and the pair nests on an island on this reservoir. And somebody, the night after the female laid her first egg, somebody took a chainsaw out on a boat, went out to the island, cut the tree down. All of that has been captured on camera. You can see the tree coming down, the bird taking off in the middle of the night, the tree coming down. And despite North Wales Police Rural Crime Unit looking into it, we still are no further forward in knowing who that was. We've had people throwing wild accusations. I know a lot of the fishermen up there, and every single fisherman I know who fishes that lake, fisherman and woman who fish that reservoir, they love their fishing, they love their fish, but they love their ospreys. And I've spoken to quite a few, and they say there's nothing like going out there, catching a big fish, and then watching the osprey come down and take a fish. So I don't know who it is. I could throw out ideas, but I like everyone else, we still have no idea. But whoever it was, I just hope that they caught out eventually. What it has done is it's meant that the North Wales Wildlife Trust, Welsh Water, and everyone else involved up there, they've now put up a far more secure system of cameras, because all we had before was a camera on the nest. We now have cameras on the base of the tree, cameras all around the island as well. So hopefully that will deter anyone else from having a go.
So there in the past, there have been various instances where fishermen have thought that the ospreys would be too much of a conflict. They'd take too many fish. Apart from fishermen, who else could possibly have a motive for something like that? I don't know. All I can think is that it might be somebody with a personal grudge against Welsh Water, personal grudge against the North Wales Wildlife Trust, personal grudge against someone who volunteers to look out for those ospreys. I simply don't know. All the fishermen I've spoken to, not just up at Llyn Brenig, but Llyn Clywedog, just down the road from me here, where there's another pair, they are delighted to have the ospreys around. And these are stocked reservoirs. So it's not as if they're depleting the population at all. They stock it with rainbow trout. There's plenty of fish in there. The fishermen are catching fish constantly there. It's not as if their wild stocks being depleted in any way or form by these birds. So
it's an absolute mystery to me. I just hope that somewhere along the line, whoever it was goes down the pub, gets drunk, and then, you know, spills the beans to someone, and that someone then thinks, actually, do you know what, this is out of order. And even if it's 10 years down the line, I hope that eventually we find out exactly who it was that did that.
It's a shame. It's not really something that you can look at and think, God, how can we stop this happening in future, apart from spending vast amounts of money of more security cameras and more security, and potentially less wild. It doesn't seem to, there doesn't seem to be that much you can do.
No, not really, and I strongly suspect it's a one-off as well. You know, when I was working for the RSPB, I know that up in Scotland they had a constant threat of egg collectors taking osprey nests, especially when the osprey was still a very, very rare bird. They were an obvious target for these egg collectors. Now, every single nest here in Wales has got at least 2 or 3 cameras. Some of them have got pressure pads, so they're well protected now. But yes, pressure pads. That's if someone goes near the nest, it sets off an alarm. And so there's an early alarm system, an early response system. 1 or 2 of the nests have actually got that on them, you know, because bear in mind, we still only have 7 or 8 pairs in Wales. So still a very rare bird here. In world terms, of course, it isn't. But here in Wales, it is. And we're very protective of our birds here in Wales. But you're always going to have an idiot somewhere who's going to take the law into his or her own hands, probably his, and do something idiotic like cut down a tree. You're always going to have that. You're always going to have that.
But the police took this quite seriously. If it was a bird, but it's an important bird for us. In the past, would they have taken it so seriously?
Yes, I think so. My experience with the police goes back to the early 1980s, dealing mainly with red kites. And the police in Wales, particularly central Wales, where we still had kites when they become extinct elsewhere, were very, very protective of these birds. You often find landowners are as well, you know, and I know that some of the landowners where we've got ospreys nesting now, Natural Resources Wales, Welsh Water, and 1 or 2 other landowners, they are exactly the same. You know, they're delighted to have these birds on their land. It's a scarce bird. It attracts people. It brings money into an area where money is badly needed often in some of these rural areas. And they are absolutely disgusted by the threat of anybody taking eggs, cutting down a tree, harming the bird in any way or form.
I think so. I think, yeah, people in some of the countries we'll be going to will be quite surprised to think that that police are now taking that seriously. But I guess that's our contribution, having had a very negative effect on the population over the last couple of 100 years.
Yes, we often think that we're better than everyone else. We have this holier than thou attitude, and we telling other countries, "Oh, you've got to get your house in order." Well, we need to look at ourselves first and look at our history as well. And a lot of the bird of prey persecution, not necessarily ospreys, but you know, we hear about poisoned seagulls, shot hen harriers, shot buzzards, and sparrowhawks. It's going on in the UK, throughout much of the UK still. So we need to get our own house in order before we point the finger at other nations. And I'm pleased to say that along much of its migratory route, you know, the osprey is respected, it's welcomed. I know there are issues, of course, you know, birds are shot in parts of Southern Europe and North Africa, but along much of its route, especially in the wintering grounds, I've been down to the Gambia several times, and I've seen how delighted some of the local people are when the ospreys first make their way back there.
Would you have a particular message? We're going to all the countries and to a couple of wetland sites all the way around to Ghana, where there are ospreys that are from breeding populations in the UK, but also from all across Europe. Would you have any particular message to people along that route?
Yeah, just thank you very much for everything you're doing to look after birds that we think of as our birds. Of course, they're not our birds. They're only here for a few months of the year. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I know there's a lot of really good conservation work going on, especially, you know, in some of the West African countries, but also in Southern Europe too. So a big Welsh diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so you mentioned Poole Harbour earlier. That's where we've been actually today, and they had some pretty bad news. Well, just yesterday, one of their two birds has been taken by a goshawk, another threatened species. So they're being quite stoic about it all. But Poole Harbour in this region is pretty exciting. Have you ever been here at the time of migration when there are kind of birds getting ready to cross?
Yes, I have. Yes, several times. It's one of my favourite parts of England. You come down Poole Harbour and Arn and Dorset and Hampshire, I think, are two lovely counties down there. And of course, a lot of our Welsh birds. I was at the Clywedog Osprey nest just the other day, and both adults and all three chicks are still there. But we know that the female will leave very soon now, and it may well be that one of her staging posts on her way south will be Poole Harbour. A lot of our ospreys we know gather there. It's a safe area, plentiful supply of food before they take that long journey then down across the English Channel, down through France, Spain, Portugal to North Africa. So we've got a very strong bond with Poole Harbour in osprey terms.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome, Sacha. Have a fantastic time and good luck as well.